Welcome to Sales Training for Podcasters, the podcast designed to better your sales process. We'll be sharing tools, tips, and techniques, whether you love sales or hate sales. If you've got a product or service to sell and a podcast, you've come to the right place. Now, here's your hosts, podcast strategists Doug Sandler and JJ Flizanes.
Welcome to Sales Training for Podcasters. Today's guest is Melanie Benson. Melanie, Profit Amplifier, helps expertpreneurs shape their message and repackage their signature offerings so they are magnetic to ideal clients and bigger opportunities. Melanie has a proven track record of accelerating results for her clients. It's not uncommon to 3 to 5x revenues in the first 6 months. She is the host of Amplify Your Success podcast, is author of Rewired for Wealth, co-author of the best-selling Voices of the 21st Century and Entrepreneur.com's Startup Guide to Starting an Information Marketing Business, and has been featured in Bloomberg Businessweek, Women's Day, and Parenting. Melanie serves on the Women's Speakers Association executive team. Access her top 10 revenue rush strategies at melaniebenson.com. Welcome back to Sales Training for Podcasters. I'm JJ Flizanes. And I have with me Doug Sandler, of course.
I was scurrying to try to unmute the unmute button. You know, it's really funny when you podcast with a co-host and you have a third party as amazing as Melanie Benson, it's going to be today. You know, I don't want to create any interference, so I mute myself. And JJ and I do that. And then we use the chat box to say, hey, who's asking the follow-up question to this? And so you have a little behind the scenes look at how podcasting works when you have a co-host. Completely messed that cue up, though, because I was writing something down about Melanie and you were asking me a question and I didn't. Anyway.
You're fine. You're fine. You know, they're learning to know who we are through all of these crazy episodes that we've had. And, you know, this show is about sales training for podcasters. It can't be more clear than that. And you heard in the bio all the accomplishments that Melanie Benson has both on and off of her podcast. And we want to learn from her because she's a rock star in the marketing world. And today's show is going to be, again, directed at helping you, the podcaster, learn how to sell better, if that's a problem for you, or the differences that we do from selling, let's say, in a live event or on a Facebook or through email, and the differences that need to happen for us to pivot onto a podcast and making that effective. So welcome to the show, Melanie.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. One of my favorite conversations to have is selling for people who don't like to sell. Woohoo.
Well,
I want to ask a question first. Let me go first because I, you know, it's so funny. Before we hit record, Melanie, before you even came on the air, and I'm like, I'm really interested in Melanie's perspective because it's kind of like I had already typecasted you into my own, where I thought you were going to fall into the world of selling and relationship with sales and all of that. It was going to be more of like I'm going to build the community and I'm going to build the trust and I'm going to have the relationship with my community. And I know you do all those things, but I completely discounted the fact that you could be like a hard-nosed salesman if you wanted to, I guess. I have no idea because you're always such like a nice person. So what's your relationship with selling, Melanie? I'm really curious.
Doug, you just made me laugh so hard that you typecasted me.
I did. I totally.
Like sales types. You know, it's very interesting, the question, because if you asked me 20 years ago when I started all this, I would have told you no, I am not going to be selling. But I got my greatest compliment not too long ago from somebody where they were investing in my mastermind with me. It's a 20,000 plus investment. And she said, you know, that was the most exquisite and elegant sales enrollment I ever experienced. I never felt like you sold me once, but I'm so in. And that's how my relationship with selling is. Like, I don't feel like you're selling anything. I feel like we're solving problems for people. And when we do that and we really hold space for people to make the best decision for them, it never feels like selling. It feels like they're getting an opportunity to get what they need and want. So that's kind of how I do it and my take on it. And I had to really work on my own mindset around it for a couple of years in the beginning to get to the place where I could have a excellent, exquisite process with it.
All right. Well, let's talk about your sale. So this is where you are now. And I feel that I don't know, no one's called me exquisite yet, but I feel like I have a pretty good sales process too, because
call you
like
exquisite all the time. I don't know what the hell you're talking about.
But I mean, in the sales process, I don't feel like I'm selling. because I'm helping and I'm problem solving. I know you're a good problem solver also, but let's talk about before you got as good as you are. And when you first started, did you love selling? Did you have to learn to sell? Did you take any trainings? Were you at all uncomfortable?
So I came out of the corporate world, and we had the company I worked for was Fortune 500 company, and we had different groups. And I was in the group that took over after sales happened. So the salesperson would hand the client over to me, and I was the kind of the project owner. And so throughout the 20 or 10 years I worked for them, I developed this disdain for selling. And I felt like that it had all of this shadow energy around it. I had a really negative belief about selling. And so that wasn't very supportive going into running my own business, because I'm the chief salesperson, right? I'm the person who has to do the enrolling. So I had to create a different mindset and a different relationship around sales. And it started with recognizing that I had to find a way to sell that felt authentic to me. And secondly, I had to learn it. And it's actually one of the things I teach in my programs now is how to sell, quote unquote, the way I sell now, because I knew nothing. I did it all wrong. I would jump to the offer too soon. I was not building any kind of know, like, and trust factor. I did not follow any kind of conversation process that moved people into becoming aware of their own challenges and what I could do to solve them. Like, I was doing it all backwards and wrong. So I took a workshop early on, probably in 2001, early 2002, that opened my eyes around, as coaches, because that's what I lead with as my coaching skills and my ability to help people achieve results. And I realized that as coaches, there's a very different way we enroll people than somebody who's at Nordstrom's, selling somebody a scarf or something. It's very different. And I was taking the productized approach because that's what I sold, quote unquote, in corporate. And I needed to learn how to do it from a relationship, from a solving a problem perspective. So yeah, I took a lot of training. I've taken trainings over and over and over again. And if I ever feel like the wheels are falling off the bus and I'm kind of not getting my results, I don't feel like I'm having the right people, I go back to the basics of what creates a powerful sales conversation. And I'm happy to unpack that if you guys want me to. But
well, I'm curious about something, Melanie, because as you were sharing that, I was thinking about even some of the recent conversations that I have, and this is maybe part of some of the. I probably could have a higher closing rate, if you want to call it in old school terms, a higher closing rate. So somebody sends an inquiry through my website, or they reach out to me and they say, hey, I'm interested in podcast production, or I'm interested in your mastermind, or I'm interested in coaching, or anything like that. And my first role is, I'm not looking at this as, oh my gosh, here's an opportunity to close someone into business. Here's an opportunity for me to educate someone if they choose to be educated. And I can find out a little bit about them. They can find out a little bit about me. We can see if we work together, providing information. And then at the end of that conversation, sending them either a really easy proposal or something that says, here's how much my services are, or here's how you take the next step with me. Is that counter what your belief is in the sales process? I'm okay I'd love to learn. So for me, I'm like, man, if I could figure out a way how to do something better or differently. I watch JJ, and she does some amazing things with her process with her community and people. So tell me a little bit about what your thoughts are with how I've kind of set it up.
Well, let me take a step back and say I look at selling in 4 stages. And so I'm a diagnostic person. As someone who amplifies results, I like to take something and say, what result are you getting? Are you getting the result you want, or not getting the result you want? And so the way I look at selling is, where's the sales process not working? So if somebody was to come to me, Doug, and say, all right, I'm like maybe enrolling 2 out of 10 conversations I'm having. I'm like, all right, what do you want? And they'd say, I'd love to get to 8 out of 10. That'd be fantastic. I'm then going to look at these 4 stages. And I like these 4 stages because sometimes the problem with selling has absolutely zero to do with the conversation, and it has everything to do with what happens before they get on the conversation, right?
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So we got to look at selling from the very first stage is, who's coming into your pipeline, and are they people that can buy from you, want to buy from you, meaning they have the problem you're uniquely suited to solve. And it's the right timing for them, meaning they're so much in pain or there's so much in desire for the solution that they're ready to enroll. And so stage one is like, are you prospecting in the right pools? And I have found that sometimes the core problem is you're not even talking to the right people. So you're getting people on the conversation in the sales conversation, and they're so not in the stratosphere. It's what I talk about in my sweet spot training system is like, you got to talk to the right person if you want to get more sales. So that's stage one. And I recognize stage two is going to look different for different kinds of businesses. Stage two is, how do you pre-qualify them to make sure that they are able to have a real conversation? And it's not, am I ready? It's, are you the right person for me? And this is where I think about 50% of the time it breaks down. I kind of came face to face with this with a client a few years back. I was doing a VIP session and I was speaking in Australia, and I opened up some VIP sessions over there. And I had a guy, just super brilliant SEO guy. He did a lot of online marketing stuff for people in his country. And he said, I'm going to these sales meetings and I'm enrolling about 1 out of every 12 to 14 people. And I'm like, that kind of sucks because that's a lot of time and energy you're getting in the car driving over there. And what we realized is that he was not doing any pre-qualifying before he booked that sales conversation. So pre-qualifying could be as simple as you have an assistant who flushes out some important factors before you book a conversation. It could look like, do you ask them some questions before they can even get to you? So we use a form. If anybody's reaching out to say, I'm interested in working with Melanie, or I want to join her mastermind or something, they have to fill out a form that tells me a little bit about them. And then my team evaluates it and says, I think this is a good candidate, we're letting them through. Or they look at it and say, I think they're not really ready. And we ask very strategic questions. Now, for me, that's important because my time at this point in the journey, like, I don't want to spend time with people who aren't ready. I don't want to convince anybody they need to do anything. I want to work with people who are ready to take that next leap. And they're pretty clear they're looking for a coach. And we're just having is Melanie the right coach? Is this the right mastermind for me? So that's stage two.
I mean, before you go on to stage three, 100%. It's like, as you're talking, I'm like feverishly writing notes down. I'm like, why don't I do that? You're like, why don't I mean, here I've been in sales. I literally want to say for my entire life, since I was 13 years old, I've been selling something, and I've always gravitated towards that sales position because I love the idea of that's, to me, that success equals that win, but I've never done that. And even just something as simple as somebody sending me an inquiry, that's just stage one. That tells me that they now have a check mark on the, hey, I'm interested in looking further about your services. But why wouldn't I pre-qualify them a little bit? Why am I wasting any of my time on a Zoom call or on a phone or in previous life, a face-to-face meeting with someone to discover that they're not even really qualified to buy what I have? They're not either ready right now. They don't have the financial capacity to do it. They don't have the sense of urgency to do it. Maybe I don't like them. How about that one? Right? So there's not good
synergy.
Yeah, not good synergy. So I appreciate those first two. And already I've learned a ton from this. Okay, let's go into number. JJ, do you want to add anything to that or
Well, you do that for podcasting. You just don't necessarily do it for your one-on-one. Someone's interested and wants to have a conversation, but you do that for the podcast. So,
I do it for the podcast world to get them into the guest seat. Oftentimes, in using our guest to client strategy, there will be some preliminary pre-qualification questions I ask. But the other side of it is when somebody sends an inquiry through our contact form on our website, I do very little, if any. I figure they're stepping closer to me asking for help. But I just, based upon what you're just saying right now, Melanie, it's like, hey, probably one more exchange of information with them, further pre-qualifying them, will not only help me determine whether they're qualified, but also give them a little bit of a sense of, hey, this guy just doesn't talk to everybody that sends an inquiry. He actually is asking poignant questions that are important to him, which means they must be important to me too, as a guy that's going to launch a show.
Well, you just hit the nail on the head. I kind of wanted one of those little sound effects right now going bing, 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 winner, winner. That's exactly the second piece of the stage 2 is if you look like you're taking every single person that comes your way, then it kind of doesn't create the right tension, if you will. Especially when we're talking about masterminds and high ticket coaching and bigger offers, there's something to be said of the application that needs to take place to make sure there is a good use of your time to interview them just as much as they're interviewing you. So it's a kind of a dual purpose there. And the third phase, third stage, I guess we would call it, this is the actual enrollment conversation, and there's a whole science to that. But then the fourth stage, or something that happens after you enroll them, assuming that you've moved them to a yes and you've got them into a commitment of some kind, it doesn't stop there. And I think this is, again, where people really miss out is, what are you doing to reinforce they made a great decision? How are you following up with them? Like on our side, I have one of my team members call them about 7 days later and say, did you get this? Did you get that? Are you able to get into your member area? And really reinforce they've made a good decision. And we have a whole onboarding strategy where we make sure that people don't feel lost and they don't feel like they're floating out there. And kind of, this is an old-fashioned term. You guys have probably heard it before, but it's a stick strategy. It's like, how do you make people feel really good about the decision? And that's how you minimize what is commonly known in our industry as refund requests. People are like, I'm gun shy. Oh my God, I just spent so much money. Like, I don't know. And they start second guessing. Now that doubt starts to filter into the work you're doing together, and they're going in with a bad taste in their mouth versus, oh my gosh, like this has been so amazing. I got my little gift in the mail and, they're taking good care of me and I feel like they see me and they value me. And so that's what I consider stage 4 is, how are you making sure you're reinforcing that good decision and, getting all the pieces and parts delivered properly so they don't feel like, I just spent a lot of money and now stuff's not really happening the way I anticipated.
I love that. And what I love is that I'm now doing it, not the fact that I didn't even think to do it before. And I'm only recently having higher end services that include more than just my time. And so I really enjoy hearing that, because from our perspective, Doug and I have done a customer service journey. We've done mapping for clients to improve the customer service journey so that they can have more clients. They have repeat clients with whatever it is that they're doing. And it feels like that's, even though it's still selling, right? It's the customer side of the delivery of whatever you just sold. And I like that stickability. I just had this intuitive hit that I needed to hire for my lowest program, right? For my $9.99 a month program. I'm like, I need a customer service manager. I need somebody, because I am not going to follow up with any of these people on a regular basis other than what I do in the Facebook group to make sure that they have all the things that are coming to them, because it's $9.99. And I think that there's been even more retention since I recently implemented that, because they do feel heard. And so when you have a larger product or service to sell, again, a game changer. I didn't even think about that. And I think that's brilliant. And I love that you even do gifts. That's the next stage for me too. But that's a brilliant way to get those high level commitments to feel valued. You're actually hitting probably every one of their love languages. You're sending a gift, right? You're doing acts of service by calling and figuring it out. You're probably also providing words of affirmation for the investment that they just took. And you're also scheduling the quality time that you're going to have with them. So I think that's great. And it's, if nothing else, everyone, that is it's all been gold, Melanie, but this one has been awesome.
Well, I love that. I love the relationship thing that you're able to right out of the gate enforce through some amazing customer service, the idea of onboarding properly. And this is one of the areas where customer service is that area that I've always tried to focus on, because I think it's so essential to build that relationship, and having someone on your team reach out to them just to acknowledge the fact that they signed up with you. And here's the process that you're going through. Because while the process is oftentimes very familiar to us as people that have done it a couple hundred times, it's not at all familiar to your new customers. They have no idea what to expect. So you send 4 or 5 emails out on the same day, and believe me, you're going to confuse the hell out of them. And many times that's what we do as business owners. We're confusing our customers. They don't know what to expect. We have to tell them. And until we tell them, it's just not fair to us for us to assume that they know the process that we're going to put them through.
I'm glad you guys love this idea of the, excellence in the customer service, because I think I'm kind of in the online business world. Like that's maybe where you would put me in the different type of niches. And one of the things that I've always seen is that online business owners typically focus more on how do I get the next sale than how do I keep the sales I've already made. And one of the things I realized about 10 years ago is there's a lot of people who spend a lot of money on really expensive marketing, on really big Facebook ads, on huge events that's not my thing. That's not where my superpowers are and where my magic kicks in. But what I can do is create extraordinary experiences. And so for me, like if you try to compete with people who do things really well that you don't, you always feel inferior, always feel like you're not meeting up or you're not going to be enough. But if you do the part you do really well, that's what leads for people. That's what they get excited about. So that's where you can make your own personal superpowers the star of your sales process, if you will, or part of the customer experience they have.
So let's go on to number 4.
That was number 4. What do you do? What do you do once they come on board, right? It's the stick strategy. So let me recap them because it sounded like something blended together in my delivery.
Well,
so one
you went through the enrollment conversation. That was like what everybody would consider the traditional. Well, that's the sale. So 1, 2, and 1, 2, and 4 were heavily emphasized, and 3, the enrollment conversation, which just went right over that.
That's because I knew we were going to spend some more time with that. So the enrollment conversation, there's a whole science around that. And so if we really look at stage 3 as how do we enroll the right people, you guys teach this. Everybody has their own system. For me, it's really, really simple. First of all, we have to get in the right mindset. And this is how I teach it to my clients, because and I'm sure you guys run into this all the time. My clients typically will say, I hate selling. And then it looks like I don't make time to follow up with people. They over deliver in the conversation. And so they lose the sale. They talk too much and don't listen. They, whatever, like they have all these patterns that don't really serve them.
Guilty, and more guilty. It's like, because everybody is so trying to hold back and give all their goodness after the sale is made. I tend to overeducate, and I know I lose sales as a result of it too. And I'm like, why did you just do that? You just gave them now I do believe in giving stuff away, but there's some magic that you can't give away because there is huge value to some of that magic.
And I wonder too, Doug, if some of that goes back to, are you even talking to the right people? And so there is a fine line, right? There's a little bit of a balancing act. And the way I learned to do this is to ask questions and don't deliver solutions. So it might look like something like this. Once we've established there's some connection there and some rapport, I've asked a series of questions to really uncover what somebody wants and uncover what's important to them about the person that's going to give them the solution. And so what I'm listening for are buying cues. And this is the same thing I teach consultant clients, trainers, anybody working with Fortune 500 companies. This is across the board. The magic in the way I sell or enroll and teach it is, if you understand someone's buying cues, you understand how to match what they're looking for to be the perfect solution. Now, there's always the chance you're not a fit, and that's another conversation. But in my opinion, we have to understand what people need and want and what's important to them in order to find the way that we can best serve them. So then I will always ask the questions, look, it sounds like you want this. And this is one of my areas of expertise, if it is. And if I could help you accomplish that faster than on your own, would it be worth us exploring what it looks like to work together? And they're either a yes or they're like, I don't know.
It's such a great question. I mean, it's just I'm looking forward to the replay of this so that I can hear myself saying that question too, because I don't want to say I puke product, but I give away a lot of information because I feel like it's of value to them. I want to show them, I love Jay Fazzet's strategy or philosophy of I'll go first. So that means, okay, I'm going to give away all my information or some of it. And then if you see that I have a lot of value, then I can ask you for money to take your business and bring it into that service or that thing that I was just sharing with you. And it's like, then it's like, well, that's a little bit more than I wanted to spend. And when I hear myself getting in that conversation or getting ghosted, I'm like, fuck, I gave away way too much information, way too much.
Well, what if you knew though, that there was a way to add value and not. So here's the way I look at it is the minute we start giving content away, we start teaching them things, we're actually doing that potential client a disfavor.
Right. Because you give them enough information so they get like, oh, I can do that. And then they
exactly. So they're not really going to solve the problem because they can't really do it on their own. But then they've got the illusion that they can figure it out, which basically reinforces a sabotaging pattern that they have that's kept them where they are forever. And so I look at it, it's like, if they're coming to me for coaching, they know that they're not doing it on their own. And if I give them some steps to take, then they're going to go take those steps and then they're still not going to do it. And then I'm not going to be there when they realize it next time. And then they're not going to hire me. They're going to hire my competitor to do what we could have done faster and kept their pain shorter.
All right. So before you go on though, just share that moment with me for a moment. So you get somebody on the phone with you or through a Zoom call, you've discovered, you've pre-qualified, you've determined that they probably are somewhat of a good fit for you. You have that conversation. What is the beginning stages of that conversation sound like? Do you have like any kind of upfront understanding with them or agreement or anything that this is what's going to take place in this phone call? Or do you just go right through the call?
Well, if they're on the phone with me, they know that this is a consultative call, right? So there's always a value proposition like, hey, let's figure out what's really in the way and what the path will look like for you to achieve the XYZ outcome. Most of the time, if people are on the phone with me, they're either looking to get a visibility strategy in place so they get more clients, get more opportunity, or they're trying to fix their sales or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So we have this understanding that we're here to solve the problem. And so the first three things you always hear out of my mouth are something around the lines of, so I'm excited to talk with you today. And I know that you're coming to me to get clarity on what's really in the way, but also what the solution is. So I do two things. I say, one, do I have permission to be the very best coach for you during our conversation? And that might look like I ask you some challenging questions and stretch you a little bit. So I've just asked permission to challenge their limits and their assumptions and their fears when it comes to investing. Mm-hmm. The second thing I say is, now look, we've only got 30 minutes or 25 minutes or whatever it is. And so I'm going to ask you a lot of questions because I want to get to the meat of this quickly. And I'm not going to let you get into any stories today, but I am going to make sure you know exactly what to do when we get off this call. And that might look like us talking about working together. Is that okay with you?
Beautiful. Beautiful. It really does give you permission to, number one, call bullshit on them. Because and the second thing, you know what really is challenging to me? Oftentimes people get into their story. And in my case, it might be the entire background of why in podcast production, why a show fits into their entire world. And while I love their story, now is not the time to share that story with me because I appreciate the fact that you want to launch a podcast like everybody else that's calling me, right?
And you don't need the 20 minutes of why they want to launch a podcast. You want to know what they want to do with the podcast so that they get something that's of value. Because look, starting a podcast isn't the value proposition. It's the what they get from starting the podcast. What's going to be different for them. And that's where they buy. They invest in someone to help them start a podcast so that they can get to an end goal. And that's what we have to remember is like, they're not buying the feature. They're not buying my coaching program. They're not buying my Amplify Inner Circle or whatever the thing is. They're buying that as a way to get to an outcome that's really important to them.
I wrote down when you said ask questions, but don't give the answer. Again, I love that sometimes I'm naturally finding that I do these things and I don't know that they're a thing. Like today, this is a good teaching tool, Doug Sandler, right?
Like I don't do any of these things, Melanie.
Hold on. I know, but I want this to be a good teaching tool. And if Jordan, you're listening to this, this is for you to learn from this too.
Yeah.
But this morning we enrolled someone into our podcast mastermind, and it was the third conversation I think he'd had with you, Doug. It was the first time I was involved in the conversation.
Yeah.
And the first thing he asked was, so what do you think? What do you think of the first three ways that I could like make money from my podcast, or what could I sell? And I said to him, I can't give you that answer. I don't know anything about, I need to see the whole picture. And I thought to myself, and you delivered answers because you knew, but it was that, but it was, there was that moment.
But I did exactly what Melanie says I shouldn't do. And I agree with her now, but because I'm like such a freaking rescuer, I just want to come to his rescue and say, oh, well, we've got these 3 things that I know will really help you. And I got really excited for him because I'm like, I can see it for you. And he's writing it down. And I'm like,
well, can I give you the nuance right there?
Yeah.
In that moment, Doug, what you do is you say, look, I can see at least 3 ways we can help you. And if we could help you solve that problem in the first 90 days of our program, I'm just making that up, obviously. Would it be worth talking about what the program looks like and how you could get started today?
That is totally brilliant. Fortunately, he pre-decided before that phone call, and JJ, forgive me if I'm stepping here, but I think you correct me if I'm wrong. He kind of decided ahead of time that he was already going to be a part of the program. This was just the confirmation call. And, so it's like still, but I appreciate and respect exactly what you're saying. And not that if he's listening to this, again, we love having you in the mastermind. This isn't about him. This is about this stupid process that I sometimes go through in trying to rescue people and solving their problems because I want to be this people pleaser guy from my old life. And I'm like, stop doing that. You're sabotaging your own business by doing that.
Well, guess what, Doug? You do the same thing that 80% of my clients do in the beginning, which is their value is wrapped up in teaching something that makes the other person feel better rather than taking them on a journey that gets them the outcome for the long term. So you're basically giving them some fish to fry up in a pan in the moment to make them feel better instead of teaching them how to fish.
Yep.
But we love you anyway.
Thank you.
Well, and I think that was so timely that it happened this morning. And again, Jordan, we are very excited to have you. And this is a great teaching tool if you're listening to this for everybody, because I've noticed how in business, and I don't know, Melanie, if you've experienced this, I've noticed, because I don't come from a sales training background. I'm sure I've taken some sales training from different trainers, but nothing where I've signed up for, I'm going to do this sales training. It's a 6-week or 6-month. Like I haven't done anything like that. It's all sort of learning as I go, bootstrapping it. But the more I get into the community, into the know, like, and trust, into the I trust that what I do works. Like just for my own enrollment period for my mastermind, every application is basically going to be a buyer of something. I have something to put them into, most likely. I mean, there has been one person I said, well, why do you need a mastermind for that? If you get the goal that you just stated to me, like, you're done. Like, it's like, you could achieve that in 2 weeks. Like, so what's beyond that? And it made her think. And she said, okay, I'm not ready, because I said, you have a lot of opportunity now that you're not taking advantage of. But hearing where you are and your process, and me thinking, oh, I'm kind of evolving into understanding that on a new level, because I've been in this business anyway, podcasting, long enough now that I have a different confidence level. I have a different results. I don't have a lot of time. So I'm making these decisions about my process sort of because of, I don't want to be getting on the phone with every single person. I don't know if they're a fit. If they're coming from my show, I know they're interested and they trust me, but whether or not, whatever I have is right for them is sort of that next step. So like with Doug and today our podcast mastermind, which is still new for me to be in this space for this show, Sales Training for Podcasters, because I've never taught sales training before. I've taught customer service training. I've taught, things like that, but this is new for me also. And but the conversation doesn't change. Like the structure that you've given everybody can be applied no matter what it is you're selling. And I think that it's as important to start practicing it outside of podcasting, but I want to move now to how you do it in the podcast, because you've been selling through live events and speaking and email marketing and joint ventures and things like that. And then I want to talk about how you've transitioned from going from the live events to your Amplify Success podcast. And even before that, because I know this is not your first podcast, because you invited me on your last podcast that I think was the Business Optimizer.
Yeah, Small Business Optimizer.
Yes. Yeah. So, that was our first really in-person get to know you meeting. We were living at the other house and I had not very good lighting. But it was one of the, our introduction to each other. But I'm just curious to how we translate everything that you just taught. I know it still works the same, but let's tweak it a little bit for the podcaster out there who wants to make money from their show and they don't do live events and they're not networking and they're not being asked to speak on other stages. Like the podcast is all they have.
I actually don't really sell on my podcast. So I'm very, very clear who my target audience is. I know exactly who I want to work with. And I work with people who are building a business around their expertise. And what I do is twofold. First of all, I talk about very specific topics that I know they're in pain about, or they're struggling to figure out how to do for themselves. They really want this. So it might be time freedom, or having a message that attracts ideal clients, or being able to be guesting on other people's podcasts. They're just like, Melanie, how are you getting so many opportunities to guest on other podcasts? How do I do that same thing? Right? There's something they want. And then secondly, I invite them into a resource. So I don't look at it as a straight to sell, but and Doug, this goes back to that. How do I give meaningful, valuable education when I'm in that sales process? I do that on the front end in my podcast. So every time I do a solo episode, I am crafting what we might say a lead magnet in itself that pulls people into wanting something else. And then that gets them into some kind of an opportunity to work with me. And I will say the one that was probably the single most successful to date, which blows my mind, is when I do my live 5-day challenge on achieving bold goals and creating more influence. Every time I do that, I have people that come directly from my podcast, because I'll talk about it in the podcast, and they get into the challenge, and they're the first that go, how do I get in your mastermind, or how do I get in your inner circle? And that seems to work the best. So I have a 2-step. I personally don't do it 1-step at this point. I might try it, but that's how I go about monetizing my podcast.
I've just sort of tried different things with my audience. I've had to create all kinds of new things. And last year when I launched my mastermind on my show, My Inner Circle, I did it through live events. I did it through a webinar. I did it on the podcast. I didn't know what was going to work. And this year I didn't have the live event option. So it was literally almost all 100% of the podcast. So it was just an interesting strategy to watch. And I know that not everybody has a podcast to build a community or to monetize that community. Sometimes it's just about building influence, or selling to clients and creating joint venture partners. So I think having a strategy based on what your goal was of having a podcast, right? And who you want to work with, like what you said in the beginning, like figure out who you want to work with, and are you swimming in those pools? Because too many times people it doesn't matter if it's on a podcast or off. Are you just casting such a wide net that it's a lot of wasted time because they're not the right people? And then when you get them, are you asking the right questions, and are you over delivering? Because I think that a newbie would over deliver at every time. And I'm sure I've done it too, that we want to prove how valuable we are. So you'll invest in us. So we over deliver. But again, that problem is that they'll turn around and they'll try to use the advice you give them on their own, not get it right. And like you said, go somewhere else or not come back. And now you've lost it. So I think some of that comes with confidence. So don't you think, Melanie, with like the more you really trust that you can help somebody, and you believe in what you're selling more and more, and it does get better and better, that you get better at that naturally.
Yeah, I think the confidence is really key. And there's been times where I wasn't feeling very confident. Like just to be completely raw, vulnerable, authentic with the whole thing, I do have times when I don't feel confident, but that doesn't mean I deviate from the process. And so you probably know this about me, JJ. I am very systems oriented, and I believe that systems create a structure that ultimately creates freedom, and it helps you get a predictable outcome. So when I don't feel confident, maybe I've got a client on who I'm like, oh, I'd love to work with this person, and I notice I'm getting a little attached, or maybe I'm going through something and my confidence is a little bit lower. I'm still going to follow my process because I know my process works. And my process is going to help me uncover if this is. So here's an example. Like once in a while I uncover somebody slips through and gets on the call with me and they're not even ready. Like I had a guy one time, you'll love this. I had a guy one time get on the phone with me. I was running a campaign and I minimized my pre-screening a little bit because I was in a hurry. Note to self, don't be in a hurry. But I minimized it a little bit. And this guy, he had been on my list for 12 years. He got on, and the first thing I said, so what is the outcome you would like to create from our time together today? And I started my whole little process. He said, well, I want you to teach me how to launch a mastermind. I was like, wait a minute, like, you know what this process is about today, right? And I asked him, I said, so you're wanting me to build a mastermind launch strategy with you on our call? He goes, yeah. And I go, that's not happening. He goes, I said, that's what we do in the program when you enroll. He goes, well, I'm not enrolling in anything today. I have like 2 cents in my bank account. I literally said, you know what? I think we're done because I can't solve that problem for you in this time together today. And I was like, I'm like, why am I wasting my time? So we have to be willing to hold our own boundaries and have the confidence to say, this is a dead end. It's not serving either one of us. Close the gate. Like, why stuff somebody into your process that's not ideal for you?
Okay. And I want to just color me guilty on this one. And I know, JJ, you know exactly who I'm talking about, but there is somebody that is in our system right now that for some reason, something just keeps telling me, just pull him through, just grant him this offer, just do this for him, just discount that, just do that. And I'm like, why are you doing this? You're only setting him up for potential failure for down the road because he's never going to enroll in one of your higher end programs. Now, that being said, if there is somebody that I want to do pro bono work for, call it that, recognize it as that, and put that person in a separate category that you know that that's what that is. Don't have the hope that he's going to enroll. It's like taking that guy that has 2 cents in the bank account that called you, that wants to figure out how to put together a mastermind, and you trying to work it out in that 20-minute phone call with them. It just isn't going to happen.
Right. You know, there's this is an important part of stage 3, going back to the enrollment conversation. We might have a 3A and a 3B. So 3A is going through the process, but 3B is what happens when the objections start piling up, right? The resistance gets high. And all of a sudden that perfect, prospect, that person you can help is throwing up every single excuse and reason why they can't work with you. What do you do? And I think this is a conundrum that a lot of people, they're like, that's when they start throwing out the value bombs, trying to, rescue the sale. And so one of the things that I learned to do was to really start to isolate the real problem, because people will throw the money problem out no matter what problem they have, right? Like, and what I heard along the way somewhere, and I don't remember where I learned this from, but if you have somebody who's piling on resistance, either A, you didn't pre-qualify them, or B, you didn't establish the energetic tension between their need and you being able to deliver it. And so now they're in doubt. So they have this doubt mounting because they don't get how what you're offering them is going to solve the problem. And so if you can take a step back and say, let's say money is the problem they surface, and you say, look, if I could help you solve the money part of this problem, are you in? Are you a yes? And how they answer that will make or break the rest of the conversation, because money's never really the problem. Their belief in getting the result is the problem. And that's what we have to do a good job of, is establishing our ability to solve that problem better than anyone else they're talking to, and create that fit that they believe that you're the only person they want to work with to solve the problem.
I think that's a great point to make, because it goes back to like what you said, figuring out what the real root of the problem is and moving out those obstacles. I have not yet mastered the way to do it necessarily in the phone call, but I know, and I know you do this too. I know that's why you have your solo episodes. I do also solo episodes and put in people to help me with those objections, right? So that by the time, if they listen to my show and they're up to date, I know that they've heard the answer to most of their objections before they're contacting me. So that way, now it becomes a little bit easy to refer back to that thing or that thing. And so far it's working, but that's because I'm only marketing to my podcast. But I think that there's another art that you have mastered that I probably have not mastered, and maybe probably Doug either, in terms of when you get that person live and they haven't listened to 20 hours of your podcast or 50 hours or 4 years in my case, where they've heard enough of this. In fact, I had somebody who just filled out an application, and when I said, can you jump on a Zoom call today at whatever time, she wrote back, well, how can I? And she quoted the title of one of my latest episodes, right? Like, she's letting me know, I recognize I'm upper limiting. I realize I'm not, right? I'm not necessarily ready, or I'm trying to be ready, or I could recognize the obstacles in my path. But I think that is something that I know I can practice, and I'm sure everybody listening could also. And so because of that, I want to direct people to, first and foremost, your podcast, Amplify Your Success Podcast with Melanie Benson. It is free. And she is a business teacher. She's teaching about business and marketing and leveraging and getting your message out there and messaging and selling and all of that good stuff. So make sure to go subscribe to Amplify Your Success Podcast to hear more from Melanie. She is a Taurus. I don't know if you can hear, she's very structured, and the systems to create freedom. I absolutely 100% believe we all need systems at some level to create that freedom and structure for us. And then where else can we send them? Where else do you want them to go and get some stuff from you today?
Since we're talking about the whole sales process, one of the things that I think is key is having the right thing to sell people, right? So I have a tool called Your Revenue Rush Toolkit. And what it does is it gives you 10 proven strategies to create revenue coming in the door. So let's say you haven't been able to get those enrollment goals, or you had a client leave very quickly. This is the kind of thing you pull something from that list and put it into action, and you can kind of boost your sales by 1,000, 5,000, 10,000 in a 30-day period. So I like to use those as keep my little emergency toolkit handy. What do I want to do to bring in a little burst of income? I do one of those, and you can find that at yourrevenuerush.com.
Excellent. Melanie, thank you so much for being here today and being part of this community. This is awesome. I know
this has been great. This has totally been
Doug's
great.
Doug's geeking out next door over here.
I am. I'm totally geeking out because, Melanie, I have to tell you again, part of it is that I love surrounding myself with people that have that exude that quiet, non-ego-centered confidence. And, I really didn't know all of what you did or how you did it before. I know you have been highly successful in your career, but, until we actually had this conversation today, I wasn't sure of some of the technique that you used in order to do that. And I see that the technique is so a part of you now. It's no longer a technique. That's just Melanie. So I appreciate, respect, and honor the fact that you exude this quiet, non-ego-centered confidence that I very much respect, admire, and would cherish if I had the same thing that you had. So thank you, Melanie, for being here.
Thank you, Doug. Thanks, JJ. Thank you guys for having me. It's funny. I'm like the stealth sales bomb,
Oh, yeah.
It's like people don't really know, but it is a skill I mastered. It was not a skill I was born with. It's a skill I mastered. And that's what I love about the podcast you guys are creating here. This is going to be a binge-worthy podcast, because if you can master this, and you have the keys to the kingdom.
Ooh, final way to get out of here. Way to go. If you want the keys to the kingdom, just listen to this podcast. Thanks, Melanie, for being here. Thanks, JJ, for another great episode. And we'll see you guys all again next week with another great guest. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for listening to Sales Training for Podcasters. To get additional information and to access more amazing content that will boost your sales game, visit salestrainingforpodcasters.com. Hey, do us a favor. Rate and review our show on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Again, thanks for listening.